Hello, this is Chris Cooper, and a big welcome to the Business Elevation Show. It's great to be back with you again for another week with another fantastic guest. I'm going to be excited to introduce Simon Greer to you today, and we're going to talk about such an important subject. In a world that can feel very divided, we're going to talk about how do we actually bridge those divides? How do we bring people together when it feels like many of us are being pulled apart? Before I introduce you to Simon, I'd like to say a thank you to my guest last week. So last week we had Helen Avery. Helen's an expert in financing projects which are around biodiversity around the globe. So we talked about biodiversity last week and the importance of managing nature. We heard about some of the challenges, some of the things that we can do personally to help with nature, and we did hear some good stories as well, some real positives that are happening around the globe, to give us that feeling of hope. So welcome, you've joined the Business Elevation Show. I'm delighted to say we've just been identified as one of the top business and mindset shows and top 20 shows for business. And what we really care about on the show is I care about today introducing people to you who are doing exceptional work around the globe, but really care about doing good. And I think that's really important today, that we spend our time looking at how can we, resolve and fix and bring people together and communities together and do work that is actually contributing to a better world, rather than adding to feelings of division and isolation or damaging our planet. My guest today is a real bridge builder. He's a social entrepreneur. He's just back from working at Harvard University today, which is exciting. His name is Simon Greer, and we're going to talk about bridging divides. Simon's work is fascinating. He's had a significant role in politics, and he's really started to realise that actually through that work he was contributing to demonisation. And he's taken a real pivot in his work. He's in the last decade, he's been really working to understand people and understand both his own side, but also immerse himself in the perspectives of people who maybe he had a very different opinion upon. He's been exploring today's conflicts. He's been supporting around bringing people together from Palestine and Israel as well. Some really fascinating work that he's been doing there to try and help with some of these divides. He works on many college campuses and universities. He's worked in prisons. So let's have a real think today about how can we rebuild trust and how can we build bridges between our families, communities and societies when they may feel divided. So a big welcome to my guest today, to Simon Greer.
Thanks so much, Chris. Good to be here. Looking forward to the conversation.
You're very welcome. And where's home? You were telling me there's a lot of snow and it's cold at the moment. So whereabouts are you?
Home. I'm a born and raised New Yorker, but home the last 4 or 5 years is in Baltimore, Maryland, where they're not really used to snow. And we've had huge snowstorm and freezing cold weather. So look out the window, there's still snow everywhere. And just today, people are starting to sort of sneak out and walk their dogs again. But basically, it hasn't hit above freezing for 2 or 3 weeks now.
Oh, really? I always think snow is very beautiful until it starts to really impact your life.
So there's ice all over the roads. It's really beautiful.
We had some a few weeks ago, and I almost put my car in a ditch, which was interesting. It's only the only snow we've had here, but we might get a little bit tonight. It's very wet and miserable. Simon, so could you just we'll start off by just finding out a little bit about your life when you were growing up, and you were young. What was that like, and how did it put you onto this journey, really, where today you're kind of quietly, helping to build bridges and gaps between people. So what were those initial insights that?
Yeah, it's funny. As I think back on it, maybe my childhood is there's like dueling narratives, or like the good angel and the bad angel on my shoulders. So my parents are from London. They grew up in the East End of London, and they came to America on a boat in 1965. I was born in New York a few years after that. And maybe because they were immigrants to New York, to America, and I was first generation, I always felt a little bit outside. Like we didn't know sort of the what everybody else knew. Like that's how I felt. Um, it could also be the nature of New York City. Like, as you know, people from every walk of life from all over the world mushed together on the subway. Um, so I have this very vivid memory of like maybe I was in eighth or ninth grade, so 13, 14 years old, and I had a birthday dinner. And I went to a school that was mostly Jewish kids. It wasn't a Jewish school, but it was mostly Jewish kids. But if you looked around my birthday dinner table, it was like Amar, the one Indian kid, and David Escalera, the one Puerto Rican kid. Like who I ended up with was people from all different walks of life. That's just sort of always been me. But at the same time, um, and I guess I think these are competing. So at the same time, there's another thread like that. If that thread was about extending yourself and connecting, and there was another thread that was about certainty and belonging, but maybe not in the healthiest way, and anger. I don't know if it's because my parents got divorced when I was young. It's because I grew up with not as much money as other kids in my class. I don't, maybe it was just internal to me, but there was like a wanting to fit in somewhere that when I found progressive politics and progressive social change work, it became like my team. And I think something happened, and I know we're going to talk more about it, but over my 20, 25 years on that team, something happened that certainty and thinking we knew better and maybe even looking down on people who weren't in our group overtook me in some ways. And if you want, I'll tell you one or two very quick stories to bring that to
It's
life.
good.
So um, uh, I was a community organizer. I was a union organizer. I organized unions in South Carolina, which was the least union state in the United States. So it's hostile territory to be involved in union organizing. But I was working with at hotels. I was organizing hotel workers, and I became close with a housekeeper at one of the hotels. Her name was Doris, and I'm white, Doris is black, and I learned a lot from Doris about the ins and outs of how a hotel business really works, which was amazing. But I was also in a very like strident kind of anti-racist ideological viewpoint. I had been trained in being a good white ally and combating racism, issues that I still to this day think are very important. But I remember I was talking to Doris's cousin, I was in my early 20s. He was probably a little younger. He's also black. And I was lecturing him on the impact of structural racism and how the system is rigged against him. And Doris looks at me and she's like, "Could you step outside?" And so I walk outside her, like we're in her trailer in rural South Carolina. We walk outside and she's like, "What are you doing?" I was like, "Well, I'm explaining structural racism." She's like, okay, he's black. He doesn't need you to explain it to him. And actually, what he doesn't need to believe is that the system's stacked against him and he can't win. But he has to believe that if he works hard, he can get ahead. So I'll teach him that and you be quiet. And like it at the time, I was sort of like shocked and like, oh, she doesn't get it. It's like, so something happened, I would say, in my ideological bubble that like I thought I knew the truth. I had seen the light in some way and I was going to tell other people. And you could say that was just me and like my own dysfunction, I guess, but I see it that it was more and more rampant on my team. Yeah.
Well, isn't that how? I mean, it feels like people will hold their opinion very very highly, don't they? And often it's today and it's opinion, and people will fall out over it. They'll fight over it. They'll push their agenda. We see this with global politics. Why is it that people hold on to opinion so highly and aren't prepared often to go and see a different perspective?
Yeah. I mean, I fear, I think, is the biggest reason. I think, well, I mean, we know about humans and groups, right? Our groups sometimes collaborate very well, and our groups sometimes compete. And like both, there's times and a place for competing. Like I like my team winning the Super Bowl too. Like it's okay to compete, but there is also a collaborative instinct, but maybe we don't cultivate it the same way. I right after I finished college, I moved to Poland, which in a way was the ultimate bridging experience. My grandparents had fled Poland. Most of my family, Jewish Poles, were killed in the Holocaust, so that I went back to Poland to work. I went to work for the trade union for Solidarity when they took over the country,
Yeah.
which was an amazing first job
Yeah.
after college and a real bridge building experience. It was not familiar territory. I didn't know the language. My grandmother was like, "Why in the world are you going back there?" Um, but the leaders in Solidarity in that union, they had this like, I don't know, it's like they seared into my heart the idea that we should believe in everyday people. Like that everyday people want to do great things, they can do great things, they can make history if they're given the chance. And so what I've seen over the last decade plus of this bridge building work is that it people's ability, willingness, capacity, excitement to go beyond my opinion, beyond my headline is it's much closer to the surface than we would expect. Like we think the hardest, most oppositional character who comes off like they know the answer to everything, it's not like it takes decades of work. Well, some of them maybe it takes decades of work to get beneath the headlines, but with most people I've actually encountered where we had deep disagreement, the truth is the possibility of finding some shared humanity, of finding a deeper understanding, not always finding agreement, often not finding agreement, and not realizing, oh, we can all just get along. Like actually, we sometimes we don't just get along, but that the capacity for so much more beyond that quick post or that like sloppily summarized opinion or that picket sign. Like there's something very available if we know how to access it and if we're willing to disclose our own journey that it's just much more readily accessible than I imagined when I was in my most deeply like ideologically bound phase.
It's really interesting you're going to Poland as well, because that's I took my youngest son there in 2024, and we stayed with some Polish people I'd met who had actually met through this show in my community, and it was just deeply moving to understand the pressures that they were under and the what was the history. And we were in Warsaw, and they took us on the whole sort of journey to have him understand what had actually happened there. And actually, when they gave him a book which was on Lech Wałęsa, and it was about the solidarity movement. And she said, "I want you to have this," she said to my son. And then I opened it up, and it was actually signed by Lech Wałęsa. It had got an autographed copy. And I said, "But you can't give this because it's an autographed copy." And she said, "No, I want him to have it because I want him to go and share his understanding of what truly happened, and to avoid these sorts of things happening again in the future." But what I think you do, and you go to Israel, and you actually are prepared to go and understand what's really happening in the ground, on the ground level. I think that's important for people to do that.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I guess I should say, like, so how did I get there? How did I get there from being the person who, would think I need to lecture an African American about racism or, um, and I've always had this interest in other kinds of people. Like I know I can now trace back that that's been true for a long time. But by 2010, 2012, I was very much ensconced in like a progressive social change community where I found belonging and actually where the angrier I was about injustice and capitalism and the more rewarded I was. Like that was like a commodity we traded in. And so I led a lot of direct action protests. I was sort of my ethos at the time. And then I recall I was having breakfast at the White House mess right the morning after President Obama was reelected. And I was having breakfast with my friend, Mike Stratmanis, who was Valerie Jarrett's chief of staff. Valerie was President Obama's senior advisor. And I asked him, like, how do you feel now that the first, like, President Obama was reelected? And he said, well, look, he took a deep breath and he said, I can finally catch my breath because I know the first black president won't be a one-term president. And I blurted out, like, oh, the country's going to do what he wants, right? And I don't know, 3 weeks later, it was completely crystal clear the country was not going to do what he wanted. And what happened for me in that moment was a it was a one part I have to say, like epiphany. There was no strategy, there was no plan. I had this sense that we no longer had just a political crisis in the country, we had a spiritual crisis.
Yeah.
And the spiritual crisis hinged on the way we treat the people we disagree with. And so part one of the epiphany was like I realized that. The second part was that I was part of the problem, that I was very skillful at demonizing other people, simplifying the issues, caricaturing. I could find a villain in any story and drive rage against them. And and this is maybe the most humbling part of this conversation. So I realized we have a spiritual crisis, not just a political crisis. I realized I'm part of the problem, and then I did absolutely nothing about it. I went back to work and I just kept doing it because I was like, I was a somebody, like I had a big office and a staff, and I was the president of a foundation, and people wanted to meet with me, and I had a business card and like could use car service. Like I was a somebody. And I think deep down, I knew what I was doing was like we were winning projects and campaigns and issues, but we were losing the country. And I was afraid of what I would lose personally if I spoke out against it. And so I went back to work and I kept doing it. Um, and the reason I linger on that point is that it can sound very much like, and then I saw the light, and then I made a change, and then I started doing. It's like, I wish that was the story, but the story was much more like I saw the problem, and then I didn't want to do anything about it because I was afraid.
Yeah.
And then out of nowhere, like that, I lost my job. That's for a whole other conversation. But I got fired, and then I was faced with like, wait, I'm not that title. I'm not that foundation. I'm not the money that we're giving away. I'm just me. And can I tell you a quick story about that?
Please, please. Yeah.
All right. So there's a restaurant in Washington, D.C. called Teaism. It's like I'm a tea drinker, maybe because my family's from London, not a coffee drinker. So I love this place, Teaism. So I just learned that I was going to lose my job, and like, there's embarrassment and humiliation and like fear. Like, what about the money? Like, I got to tell my wife. And so I took the steps I needed to make sure, like, financially we're going to be okay, which is not to be taken lightly. Like, I think that's maybe like the first panic. It's like, wait, I'm losing my job. Yeah, I'm embarrassed, but wait, like I got bills to pay and I'm a dad and young kids.
Yeah.
And so I was at TISM talking to my executive coach. His name's Robert. And Robert did this activity, and it's going to sound so hokey, but he said, like, okay, Simon, I want you to close your eyes and go inside. Like, I know you're upset. Obviously, you just lost your job. Like, go inside, and where do you feel it? I was like, I feel it in my stomach. So I'm in a restaurant, right? I'm in a public place. He's like, okay, and what color is it? I'm like, it's green. It's like, okay, and how would you describe it? It's like kryptonite. And does it smell? Yeah, it smells totally toxic. He's like, go inside of it, go deep into it, open your eyes. What do you see? And I was like, I see that the golden handcuffs are off. Like it was, I mean, it's uncanny. He's like, well, come on, you got to that a little fast. I was like, no, no, really. I know exactly what I'm going to do. I don't have to play a role. Like I'm going to be me, and I know what I'm going to do with my time. I'm going to immerse myself with the people who I have demonized. That's it. I don't know how I'm going to do it yet, but I know I'm going to do it. And those people are corporate business leaders and white working class conservatives. Those are the two groups who are like the bad guys in the political story I was telling for decades. And I had total clarity. The reason I wanted to emphasize the point about not having the courage to make the change first before I lost my job was that this is not easy stuff. Like the decision to abandon a team where you have loyalties, where you're a known person, where your identity is wrapped up. You ask the question, why do people hold on to their opinions? Well, it's for all those reasons. Like those opinions bound me to a community. It
Yeah.
made me somebody in the community because how I articulated those positions and how loyal I was to the positions and the people. And that's hard to walk away from. And it was only when I had nothing else to lose professionally, like I had no job. I was no longer a somebody. Then I was like, okay, now I know how I want to live my life. And it's totally different than the way I had been living it.
Yeah. And isn't some of that, if you look at the school systems and the university systems, through education, what we can do, and the systems that we live in can do, is they can move the smartest brains often to working on situations in the world of finance, the world of big business, etc. There's a desire to kind of land those kind of jobs, but actually they may not be doing the good that we might want to do or sit alongside our values. You mentioned politics, which you find yourself in, but it's almost like a system that um, results in people finding themselves in a place where they have to discover for themselves that may not be doing the good that they might want in the
Yeah,
world.
for sure, that discovery is totally possible. There's also, um, I think it's increasingly the case. We have an assumption that the people around us agree with us,
Yeah.
and that if they disagree with us, they shouldn't be around us. So,
Okay, gotcha.
like,
Yes.
right? Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
oh, everyone on my team at this tech company, don't we all see it that way? We agree about the Supreme Court decision. We agree about who should be elected, and if not, I'm not sure I'd want to work on a team with them, which is in fact completely upside down. Like, wouldn't our team at our finance company or our tech company or in politics be better if we had a broadly diverse set of viewpoints? And I don't mean like uh, box checking diverse. We look diverse. I mean like real life experience, thought, and perspective diversity, because it makes us better. It makes us smarter. There's this thing called confirmation bias, right? Which is when I surround myself with the people who see things like I do. And actually, I talk about this a lot with people. The truth is, we like to think we live in the facts, right? Well, I've studied this. I actually, my observation is that we live at the top of what I would call the ladder of inference. We live in our stories and we go down the ladder to find the facts that actually confirm what we already believed.
Yes.
And then we surround ourselves with people who went on the same journey. And you could say that's what's happened in our politics, right? I just watched the other side's news long enough to find the evidence that those guys are crazy. And then I come back and tell my friends, like, did you see the crazy thing that he said? We're like, yeah, they're crazy. We're the good ones. They're the bad ones. And both sides do it. All sides do it. And that's how we've gotten to a place where I live happily in my bubble with my opinions, but I don't get them challenged. And I don't build the kind of profound relationships across difference that might rattle me into thinking somewhat differently or questioning my assumptions, or even if I don't change my core beliefs, clarifying, oh, this is why I believe what I believe, rather than I just inherited that from someone else, something I read, someone who passed it on to me, but I came to it myself.
One of my someone I interviewed in the past, David Ellison, his organisation did 1 million value surveys across the globe, and they found I think it was the number one value for the USA was belonging. People want to belong to something, whether it was follow a football team, an organisation, etc. But sometimes to belong can mean that you end up with joining a culture or a set agreed values and norms that might be completely not in your interest or in the world's interest.
Yeah, and I mean, I think in a lot of ways, all the issues we're arguing about in America right now, climate change, immigration, et cetera, I actually think, and my friend Tal Becker, who's a negotiator in Israel, he says this, that often the thing that we're talking about isn't what we're really talking about.
Yeah.
And I think that's true with these issues. Our challenge in America is that we don't currently have a broad enough and deep enough story that binds all of us, right? And it's a big place with people from all walks of life. We don't have a shared story. And so we're fighting over who has the right to belong here. If I think America is, a unique contribution, is divinely inspired, is a gift to the world, and you think it's born in sin and it's never really grappled with the legacy of racism and slavery. You think it's fatally flawed. I think it's divinely inspired. And now we're trying to talk about immigration. Like, we're fighting about who belongs here and can we build a story that allows us to belong here together, even with our disagreements. I sometimes say that bipartisanship is working together on the things where we agree,
Yeah.
but pluralism is living together in the areas where we fundamentally disagree. And to me, that's the more interesting work. I want bipartisanship. We have problems to solve. But the deeper question is, you and I fundamentally disagree. We see the world actually differently. We don't misunderstand each other. We're not confused. We disagree. And those disagreements have implications. But I got to share this country with you. And how do I do that?
Yeah. Well, after the break, we'll come back, and what I want to do is spend a little time understanding. You've taken the time to go and spend time with people that you demonized, to really understand. You mentioned big corporations and white collar, white. I'd like to understand what you learned from that. And also, we'll talk a little bit about your work as well in Israel and Palestine. And I'd love to really talk about how, as individuals, can we ourselves start bridging gaps that we see in our lives, in our works, in our community. How can and what are your top thoughts, ideas on how we can achieve that?
Sounds great.
Excellent. So we're going to be back again in just a couple of minutes. Please do join us after the break. I do recommend to people, if you're in a situation where you can take a note or two, just take one or two insights from this conversation that you can go away and put into practice and work with. Good way to utilize this time really well. So back again with you in just a couple of minutes. So do join us shortly. Hi, this is Chris Cooper. I'm here with Simon Greer. We've been talking about bridging divides, and in this section, I'd really like to talk with Simon now about some of his experiences of bridging gaps, and then actually what can we do as individuals practically in our work, in our lives, with our communities to help bring people together, to help ourselves to understand better and move things forward more harmoniously and positively. So, Simon, maybe we could talk. Well, you mentioned in the previous section that you went and spent time with people who you previously demonized. Who did you spend time with, and what did you learn?
Yeah, great. So my first stop on the journey was actually with corrections officers in rural Michigan. So through a set of relationships I had in labor and politics, I was able to connect with the union that represented corrections officers. So it's a very conservative workforce. There are about 6,000 of them in Michigan. Not entirely white, but more white than anything else.
And so
Certainly
are these prison officers?
prison
So
officers,
just
exactly.
we're go about
Yeah,
60 countries. So I've often check into this show.
yeah,
So just wanted
yeah,
to.
exactly right. Yeah, prison officers. And uh, so the first time I met with them, I invited them using what I now call the invitation, which at the time I didn't know I was on to anything. Like I just invited them to a meeting. Like I typed literally an invitation, and the invitation said, "Please join us at this meeting. We want to explore some issues that maybe don't always get discussed. Our commitment to you is we'll take seriously the things that others hold dear. If it matters to you, it'll matter to us." That we're not going to try to change anybody. We're going to be curious about why you think the way you do. That we don't think we're diminished by hearing ideas we disagree with. We think we're enhanced by it. And that we think there may be more common ground than we expect, but even when there isn't, we can still respect each other. But then I said, but not just respect each other, we can actually love each other. So these guys come to the meeting and I asked, like, why'd you all come? Like a lot of people came. They're like, well, we've never gotten an invitation like that. And so this was 12 years ago. I now use it for every retreat, training, workshop, class. The idea that we're going to take seriously what others hold dear, right? That notion that if I don't have to agree with you, Chris, but I see in your eyes that this matters. And so I'm
Mm.
going to take it seriously. Like we skip over that all the time. We just
Yeah.
imagine someone, like, I'll give you an example. I work and I'll come back to the corrections officer in a sec, but I work a lot with evangelical schools. I'm Jewish. So imagine I get to an evangelical college. They're hosting me on campus, right? They're going to interview me in chapel, which is a big deal to have someone who's not a believer, right? Not a Christian, speak in chapel at an evangelical college. And they welcome me, and their expression of their welcome is like they're animated by Jesus. Like the love of Jesus is what they feel when I'm there. And if I were to say to them, like, yeah, the whole Jesus thing, that's not my thing. Like, what? What? It would hurt them.
Hmm.
That doesn't mean I have to accept Jesus into my life the way they have, but I can still honor that for them, there's nothing more important than Jesus, right? That doesn't mean I believe Jesus is the Messiah, but they do. And so that moment where someone starts to tell you something that matters to them and you come with your counter argument or your priority and you skip the moment of saying, like, whoa, I get it. This matters to you. That if there was like one tip from this conversation, it's like not rushing with my rebuttal, not rushing with my priority, but just hanging in there to tell you that I take your priority seriously, even when I disagree with it. It's a step we can all take. So anyway, I sent this invitation. A lot of corrections officers came, and I of course, I learned a lot about them. I mean, I really learned about how narrowly I had come to draw the lines of who I would talk to and of what I believed. This is kind of funny. I said to this corrections officer, like, so just tell me, like, what percentage of the people in prison are here, like, in incorrectly, like they're actually innocent? And he said 90, and he hadn't even finished. I was like, yeah, I thought so too. That's right, because it's an unjust system. He was like, no, no, 99% of them are here because they're criminals. And I was like, whoa, whoa, I totally missed that. Like, I thought I knew more about what's happening in the prison than the person who works there.
Yeah.
And I was tempted to interrupt him. So I think what I learned from them is like, I learned facts and information, of course, like what it's really like in a prison, those kind of things. I've never spent time in prison. But Chris, the thing I learned most deeply, corrections officers in the United States, they have a 59-year life expectancy, right?
Really.
Our life expectancy here is about 74 for a man. So you lose 15 years in life expectancy because you work in a prison. They have the highest PTSD rate, suicide rate, alcoholism rate, divorce rate of any profession in our country. More than police, more than people, military veterans, who all have incredibly high rates. And we don't just warehouse the people we incarcerate, we warehouse the people who work there. Like they're asked to tuck away their vulnerability and their humanity to do a job that none of us would want to do. And then they're judged for doing it. And I think I learned that information through their stories, and I learned the toll it takes on them. And I learned maybe the extent to which I should be a little just pause for a second and say thank you, you know, um, because you do a job that means I don't have to worry about that. It's not my problem. So I learned a lot of lessons through them, and those lessons have carried through to the work with evangelicals, to bringing very conservative college students and very progressive college students together, to taking delegations from all across the political spectrum to Israel and the Palestinian territories. But if I could just say, sometimes when I talk about bridge building, people think I'm like in the kumbaya business. Like, well, we'll just all hug it out, or we'll water down what we think and we'll just find common ground. And I think it's important for people to leave this conversation understanding that that's not what I believe. Like, I really think there are disagreements and there are unique contributions that our differences bring to the table, and we should protect those. We shouldn't actually blur and muddy them, but we still have to figure out how to do it together. And so my view on this bridge building stuff is that it's not sort of therapeutic and soft and mushy. It's more, think like a martial arts black belt. Like, I want to train people so they are highly capable of staying in the fire of difficult conversations, generating value, building strong relationships, creating change over time through a skillful engagement in the real differences, not talking about the differences. I have this model I call strong back, soft front. Like, I don't want you just to become a ball of mush and not stand for anything. But you don't always need to be the first one to throw a jab, right? If you have a strong back, meaning you know where you stand, you've done your own values clarification work, you're confident in your beliefs, then you can be very open-hearted, right? It's actually the people who aren't quite sure why they think what they think, they're the quickest to lash out, right? Because they're afraid their worldview might get upset, or right?
Yeah.
They're questioning and they're afraid to question. So I think for me, this model, which starts with the invitation and then it goes to a series of skills, and I hope if it's okay, if you want, we can turn to it. I really want people after every conversation I've been in, every training, is to go home with things they can like do tonight at home. Like,
Okay.
you don't have to go do it in Israel and Palestinian territories. You don't have to do it in prisons. You can just do it at the dining table. And here's some steps. So if you want to talk about, take it in that direction, I'm
I
happy.
think it'd be absolutely great to do that. I mean, maybe whether you've got a story in there about what you've learned in Israel and Palestine as well. That's helped you with this would be great. But
Yeah. All right. So I'll do maybe I'll do a story from the Middle East, and then I'll go to some quick
I
skills.
think we should do that. Go into the quick skills. Yeah.
Okay. Well, so I'll tell you one of the sometimes in intense disagreements, charged situations, you'll have people say to they'll say to me like, "Well, but aren't you blurring the facts? Like, we have to actually get to the facts." And what I've come to see is that um, I know it's risky to say because of fake news and all that, but the truth is sometimes the fundamental facts are in dispute. And even when they're resolvable, mostly we don't change our minds because of facts, right? Your opinion isn't really going to convince me that my opinion is wrong because you outsmarted me or you gave me a piece of information I didn't have. Really, if you can get inside my worldview and walk with me, like see how I see the world, how do I construct my common sense? And now together, inside how I think about things, you're able to help me explore questions I might have, as you also are vulnerable enough to explore questions you might have. Now there's a chance that I'll grow and shift and change. And so, I have been in enough arguments about whether Israel's war in 1967 was offensive or defensive, and probably every listener is now offended if they know what I'm talking about. Like, there are people who say Egypt was about to attack Israel, and so it was a preemptive strike, but it was purely defensive. And in 6 days, no one knew how this was going to happen. Israel expanded and got a lot more territory. And there are other people who are like, it was clearly offensive. Like, Egypt hadn't, all their planes were still on the ground. Like, they hadn't attacked. So it was an offensive strike because Israel has a maximalist vision of itself and it aspired to take over all this land, which it did. Okay, there's evidence that Israel bombed the Egyptian Air Force first. It's true. Like, that's undisputable. Whether it was smart to do because they were literally about to get attacked or it was an act of aggression, we'll never answer.
No.
And even if we could prove it 60 years later, it doesn't actually matter. Like, what matters is, do Israelis and Palestinians believe that each one is legitimately entitled to self determination in this piece of land? And if I believe that you believe I have the right to live here in safety and for me and my children and my people to prosper, and I believe the same about you, then questions about, they're not easy, but thorny questions about Jerusalem and refugees and borders, you can actually have a conversation about them, not because I proved to you what happened in 67, but because you trusted me, right? And then you could extend that sense of trust to your team, and I could do it with my team. So that's one of the things I've observed in Israel is like, we can try to prove the archaeological record and where it supports the biblical stories, and then what will happen? Like, we'll still all be living here and need to figure out how to live together.
Yeah. So, so,
Uh,
so we
Skill
need to.
SWAT.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So we need to be thinking about what's important right now,
Yeah, exactly.
and
And
rather than wait in the past.
sometimes for me to trust you, you need to accept like to take seriously what others hold dear. So I may fundamentally believe X and Y about the past events, and you may believe A and B about them. I've got to find a way to say to you, like, Chris, we disagree on this one, but I
Yeah.
get that these things are foundational for your narrative. I get it. And I'm not going to tell you, like, I don't see it that way, but I'm not going to tell you you're a crazy person for thinking it. Like, I get that you could see it that way. All right, so just a couple of quick skills. So my favorite is the skill. It's the art of the open-ended question. So I teach listening. I think I always say listening is a superpower. It's the leadership skill that is least used and most valuable. We don't tend to say like, "Wow, that CEO is awesome." I mean, they really know how to listen. It's just, we tend to say like, "He made the tough call," or "gave the great speech," or "inspired the troops." But I think listening is the breakthrough skill. There's a quote from a 14th century Persian poet named Hafez, who said, "How do I listen to others? As if everyone were my most revered teacher, speaking to me their cherished last words."
Wow.
And to me, that's like each time I'm with someone and they start talking, rather than rehearsing my rebuttal, rather than planning dinner, rather than I'm right here, like, whoa, this person, what they say right now, it could change my life. This could be the gem I've been waiting for. And if you do that enough, team behavior improves because now everyone on the team feels like, whoa, I got to show up with something to say because that's what they're expecting from me rather than I'm just going to run out the clock, right? So that's the intention for me is the Hafez quote. Um, I teach listening in 5 building blocks. The first one is silence, which is simply the act of like just refrain for a minute. Like just don't feel like the second you finish your sentence, I got to get in there with mine. Just take a pause, maybe 3 seconds. Because in that time, it allows maybe the person you're talking to go one step further or someone new to jump in. We tend to come in so fast right after the other person finishes. Their sentence hasn't even landed on the ground, and we're jumping in with our answer. So silence is the first one. But my favorite is, as I was saying, is the open-ended question. And if you took nothing else away from this conversation, um, this one question, which is kind of a command, not really a question, it isn't exactly open-ended, but I'm going to call it an open-ended question, is would you tell me a little more about that?
Yeah.
So in almost any setting, a colleague comes to you with some critical feedback, your spouse is upset about something, your kids seem frustrated, you're in a terrible political deadlock. If the intensity with which you come at me, like directly at me, instead of me counterpunching, if I can sink down with you, say, like, oh, well, Chris, just say a little bit more about that. Or how did you come to see it that way? Or, well, how does that feel? Any of those things take us out of a punch counterpunch and they take us down a notch, right? And for you, if you came at me pretty hard and instead of me countering, I say, well, Chris, just say a little more about that. Now you're like, whoa, wait, he actually wants to hear what I think here. He's not going to fight me on it. Oh, he's curious about me. He's taking me seriously. All of those things like lower your defenses if you came in kind of hot. They also give me a chance to catch my breath, right? Like you caught me off guard. Now I can breathe. And now I got us out of the headlines. I got us down to something deeper. And the deeper stuff, and again, because I don't think it's kumbaya, it's the deeper stuff where we're going to find real solutions. When I've put corrections officers and formerly incarcerated people together to look at the problems of our criminal justice system, they are pit against each other. There's not a lot of love lost there, but they're not looking for mushy middle compromises. We need to transform that system, and it's by getting them to go deeper, to admit my hands aren't clean, to admit we've done damage to each other, to admit that this is a hostile environment and is taking a toll on me and on my family. Okay, now we're in territory where we might be able to solve this problem rather than up here at like who's to blame and whose statistics are right or wrong. So that was a few tips. I hope those are helpful.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. How do you how when that question there? Would you tell me a little more about that? I've had experience sometimes of using a question like that, and actually half an hour later, still listening to what's and, and I'm actually going somewhere tonight where there are several characters who have a habit of doing that, and I will probably be quite quiet this evening because I tend to listen, which isn't always the most fulfilling social experience. But how do you deal with that?
Yeah, I mean,
Because sometimes we're thinking about we also like to, as human beings, we like to be able to communicate back.
yes. I mean, I think I like you sometimes. I like using those questions because then I don't have to talk.
Yeah,
Like, fine. Like, okay, this night's gonna go on with other people talking. That'll be okay. Um, I think, one of the other skills we teach is called the footprint. It's a one approach to reflective listening. So imagine I asked you to tell me a little more about that, and now you start talking and you've made like 3 or 4 points. I might pause you. I literally put my hand up and like, whoa, hold on, Chris. So you had this first stage in your career, then you pivoted and you did the second thing, and now you're trying to think about the road ahead. And that would actually lead a person to be like, wow, like you're really listening to me. Like you caught these three big points, and
mm,
that might then let me then step back in myself, right? So I've reflected back three big things I heard from you. You can I can see on your face that like you're really grateful that I listened that well. And then I might say, and that reminds me of this thing. Let me jump in and tell you a little bit about my own work or my own journey, because I feel sometimes people talk and they keep talking and they talk some more, because they don't quite feel heard. And I think it's, in a strange way, it's one of the things humans really long for, is to feel heard. And I think when you do, I mean, that's why I said early on that I think the opportunity to find humanity is just beneath the surface. Like with a lot of the hardest corrections officers or other leaders who I've ended up working with over the last decade plus, when they feel like I've really heard the thing they're saying, like you get to tears really fast. Like people are
yeah,
carrying a lot.
yeah,
And if they feel like, wow, that person really was there for me, like they're right there, not zoning out, not looking for a better conversation at the cocktail party, but like right here, people really, I think people long for it, and it's lacking in a lot of our lives. We're busy with our phones and our tasks and logistics, and like even with our loved ones, like the really like, no, I'm right here, not trying to tell you my story about the day, but here for your story. So I think if you ask an open-ended question and then you reflect back that you've heard the person, you can create space if you want to then jump in with your own story.
yeah, yes. So and sometimes I guess I spend in my career I've spent a lot of time coaching people as part of it, and I've had a lot of experiences where people cry because when you do listen to them, but actually sometimes just allowing them to talk can be enough for change to happen because they start to verbalize it, and then they suddenly start to see own connections and patterns in their thinking.
Yeah, I mean, in a way, if we're trying to make change and we're trying to get people to examine views that they've held or patterns that they've lived in, which obviously you do a lot of helping people with that as a coach, often what we need to do is not interfere. And so I sometimes talk about it like if you're telling me your story, it's like you're driving your car down the road, the car's your story. And sometimes the listener like grabs the wheel and tries to tug on it to tell their story, and that swerves us off the road,
Yeah,
right? What I really need to do is keep my hands off your wheel. Like you're telling the story. Can I signal to you that I'm listening? Right? Can I ask you to go a little deeper? Maybe I can use some other tools like, well, I hear you're pretty far into that story. Let me just ask you, uh, are there conditions under which you might let go of that story a little bit? Or what would you do if I told you that there's another way to think about that? Could you imagine even like indulge me for a second? How would you answer it if I asked you this? Or I think there's a lot of de-escalation techniques we can use to not have things get out of control that allow people to keep going, and as they keep going to open up to new possibilities. And then there are really good interventions like, let's ask somebody, instead of don't you think, like, to what extent might you think? Like
yeah,
it's such a little thing, but just that little change in language takes someone from defense to
yes,
feeling like you're asking them to explore options. And so I think I think if we don't interrupt too soon, if we can be comfortable in the quiet, if we can honor their story, take it seriously, and then skillfully invite them to go beyond like the most narrow part of their story, in a context of trust and openness, the possibility of change for both of us is dramatic, and that therefore the possibility of progress is way beyond what we've come to expect in our politics, in our teams, and in our families.
Beautiful. And that's where your analogy with being a martial artist comes in. It, you know,
100%.
to stand back and listen, observe, and develop the right mindset. And beautiful. Thank you so much for the conversation today. It's been absolutely fascinating and helpful, and so important. So, thank you for the work that you do, and the contribution that you're making. And I'd like to thank Dov Barron as well, who introduced us, who's
Yeah,
fantastic out of
sure.
Vancouver. So worth checking Dov out and his amazing work. Dov and I share the very best guests sometimes from our shows with each other, and Simon, you were highlighted as being one of those. So thank you. Do you have just before we go? Do you have a final message you'd like to leave us with?
Maybe this is a little bit of a funny note to end on, but the work of Brian Stevenson here in the US has helped, I think, Americans question what we think of the people on death row. Like, to remember they're better than their worst deed,
Yeah,
which was a very provocative idea. And uh, it led me to ask the question, isn't it the case that if we've come to see the humanity in people on death row, that we could each carry with us the same sort of generosity of spirit with people who we disagree with, quote, their worst vote or their worst comment?
yeah,
Like, I have sympathy for the guy on death row, but my uncle who said the thing I didn't like at Thanksgiving, like that guy I got no patience for. And so maybe if we just carry ourselves remembering that we're each better than what I might think of as your worst comment, your worst deed, your worst vote, your worst decision. Like, we're better than that. And if we believe that about ourselves and about each other, the sky's the limit in terms of what we can do together.
fantastic, Simon. Been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thanks,
And
Chris.
Simon's purposely doesn't have a website. He does an amazing work around the world. People kind of find him through connection. But if you want to find out more about Simon, I'm sure you probably look at his LinkedIn page. If you want to connect with him, I would suggest that you say where why you want to connect with him. I get loads of anonymous ones, and I just connect with the people who give me a good reason, or we know each other, or came through something like this. So do check out Simon Greer's work. There's various bits around his work on the internet that you can access as well. But go away and think about where are the divides in your life, in your work, in your communities, and maybe you could play a role through your listening skills, through asking really great open-ended questions, and learning to be that kind of martial artist, really to help people think differently, help yourself think differently, by also going in and maybe having conversation with some of those people that actually maybe you even feel like you despise at the moment, and understanding their perspectives and views sounds like a great way to progress. On next week's show, we have Laura Greenwood. Laura is an expert in, we're going to talk about motivating, not deflating in organizations. She's been working for many years in Hawaii for lots of big organizations, lots of big hotel groups, etc., doing lots and lots of training around feedback and around motivating and learning how to uplift teams and people. So do check that out next week. Once again, Simon Greer, it's been an absolute pleasure. If you've
Thanks
got
so much,
any
Chris.
got any questions or comments, you can drop me a note at chris@chriscooper.co.uk, and go away and remember that good matters in everything we do, and make sure that you're a catalyst for good in the work that you're doing too. So take care.